Okay, so I'm in an office with some rather boisterous air conditioning right now, so just kind of be patient and block out some of the background noise. So today I just wanted to talk about the final paper for 242, and it's really important to start thinking about working on the final paper for 242 within a few weeks of starting the semester, really, because this is a big percentage of your final grade. I don't do percentages, but I do points, but overall it's a significant chunk, usually about 30 or 40% if you break it down, of your entire grade. So essentially what you're going to do is the first thing is within the first week of class you're going to sign up for a novel, and that list is on the second page of this, okay, and we'll come back to this list in a second. But essentially what you're going to do is throughout the semester, hopefully, read this novel and then start to think about how this novel fits in with other works during the same time period. And so if you pick a novel from 1936, then as we go through the semester and we start approaching that era, you should start to see some themes and ideas in American history that are reflected during that time. So essentially what you want to do is sort of take this novel that you've read and sort of give it a place in American literature and discuss what's important about this particular work that you've chosen. In some cases that'll be easier than others, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But essentially what you want to do, again, is think about these trends, and there'll be ones that we discuss in class or on discussion boards during presentations, all those sorts of things, how these trends appear in these same works. So for instance, once we get to the 70s and 80s, 50s, 60s, there's lots of concern about the suburbs in the United States, and so maybe a novel that you pick will have that sort of thing. So then the question is, like, what is sort of the shared perspective during that era towards American history, American culture, American literature? So one thing I'll point out too, and this is a danger for a lot of students, is that there's a good number of these, maybe not all of them, but there's a fair number, I guess, of films on this list that have, or novels on this list rather, that have film adaptations. And one thing I will tell you or warn you about is that on this list, those books that have film adaptations, the film adaptations take tremendous liberties with the novel itself. So Kiss Me Deadly, for instance, is one where the film pretty much has almost no relationship whatsoever with the novel, other than the title. And so I would like to point this out really early on, this idea that if you write this paper and it becomes clear to me that you're talking about the film rather than the novel, so you give away certain details basically that tell me that you are quoting the film, or that you're relying on the circumstances of the film rather than the novel, you'll find that your research portion or grade on the rubric will evaporate. So make sure that you're reading the book, that you're not relying on Spark Notes or the equivalents, and you're not trying to take the easy way out. So again, one thing I encourage you to do as you go through the semester is always take notes out of your short stories and poems and plays, take notes during class, take notes from what you're seeing on the discussion board, the presentations, and you should be doing the same thing with your novel, okay? As you read, you should be taking notes, or if you're that sort of person, highlighting in the book, that sort of thing. So you should always be pulling from that material. So when it gets time to write your paper, okay, you have everything ready to go. The worst case scenario is if you have read the book and you're getting ready to write the paper, but you haven't noted anything at all in the book. You're like, oh gosh, there's this one part where this person said something, and I think it was on the left-hand page, and you're kind of flipping through every left-hand page that you can find. That's the worst thing to do. You should always try to pull this material out. So as we go through this, I also should point out, too, another warning that if you take a look at these books when you sign up for them, you will find that many times the thinner the book, it feels like it's going to be something really easy to read, but the more complex, I guess, the topics are. And so I've had students in the past that will go, for instance, and they will pick up Nicholas Baker's The Mezzanine, which is maybe 100 pages, 110 pages at most, somewhere in that area, and they will say, oh great, it's a short book, it's a lot better than this 250-page work, and they will start going through The Mezzanine and be absolutely confused. So I encourage you not to consider the length of the book as you start to choose these. Some will be short, some will be long, some will be complex, some will be simple, but there's no overlap between those different concepts. And again, these books should all be available either at a Blue Ridge Library or regional libraries, university libraries. They're all still in print. They should all be pretty easy to find. So one thing too, and this is important, during the class, I am not going to check up on you in terms of your reading this novel. You are now in your second year of college. You are officially an adult and college student in every sense of the word, and so I do not need to have you do special little write-ups, assignments, or anything like that for your novel. You just need to produce for me the evidence that you read it and you understood it, and we're able to place everything in context. So look, if you come to me 2 days before the paper is due and you say, gosh, I haven't even found the novel yet, that's you, okay? That's not me. So you are signing up for this book in the first week of the semester, which will give you anywhere from 9 to 14 to 15 weeks to read it. And there have been students in the past when I've given these projects where they will wait until 2 or 3 days before the paper is due, manage to get through the first 2 or 3 chapters, and then just write about those, and it becomes fairly obvious, and they don't do very well on those papers, and that's not a good thing, because in 200 level classes, and you'll soon discover in 300 and 400 level classes, the margin for error is very thin. In some classes, you're only going to have one major work. In this class, you're going to have basically 2 or 3 major works to do, and the paper still outweighs a lot of them. So one other thing too is, if there's no givebacks in this. So if you sign up for Nicholas Baker's The Mezzanine, and then you go and you find it, and you say, oh my God, I don't want to do this, I want to do something else, too bad, okay? Because normally what happens is other students have chosen books, and then people want to swap books, and that's not something I want to police. So you can take a look at this list and just do some background research on them. Look them up on Wikipedia, read some summaries of them, reviews, etc., and then make your decision. Once you've made your decision, that's your decision, okay? I'm not really going to entertain the idea of, well, I made this decision and now I'm making this decision, mostly because one thing you really, again, should be doing is starting to prep for your paper within the first couple weeks of class. It's a good habit to get into. So, again, at any point in time, if you have questions about the novel, on some of them I'm a little rustier than others, so a couple of them I haven't read in like a year or so, but a significant number of them I've read several times. But if you're a little bit stuck and you're like, wow, how can I fit this into everything else? I can give you guidance. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I can say, well, maybe take a look at this or think about this era and what's going on. But again, I'm not going to check up on you. I'm not going to make you give me outlines. I'm not going to make you give me annotated bibliographies or anything of that nature, because, again, second year of college, you should know how to do all of this stuff without me, breathing down your neck telling you to do it. So one thing, again, is that this paper is worth 200 points of your final grade. In my brick and mortar classes, that usually means that weighs the same as both exams, or weighs the same as a presentation and an exam. So there have been more than a few students who have gotten like B and C averages throughout the entire semester, and then didn't do well on the final paper, like it was only 800 words, or they clearly didn't read the work or whatever, and ended up getting a D or F. So it does swing you, I think somewhere in the area of 15 or 16 percentage points. So it's a huge chunk of stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind. And I'll bring up the rubric here in a moment, but basically these are the basic guidelines, okay? And the thing I should bring up will be your research, because that is usually the most challenging part of this project. So you need, okay, along with your primary source, or primary sources, I guess, those would be what you're writing about. So you will be writing about one of these novels. So let's say that you're doing Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. That's going to be one of your primary sources. The other primary source will be something else from the anthology, the stuff that we read in class that you're going to compare it to or use as evidence for themes toward, and so on. So Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, written in 1970s. Maybe you want to take a look at African American literature during that time period, the build up to it. We talk about Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, et cetera, et cetera. And so maybe you want to pull those stories and poems and plays out and say, okay, let's see, how does this fit in, okay, with African American literature in the 20th century, something like that. And then you also have at least 5 academic sources that you need to cite. So on that works cited page, along with correctly citing everything in the text, there should be a minimum of 7 sources, your 2 primary sources, and then 5 other sources. And those other sources, okay, are not schmoop.com or 123SA help me or whatever that they're called. All right, they're not dictionaries, they're not thesauruses, they're not encyclopedias, they're not A&E biography, they're not encyclopedias. All of those things are not considered academic sources. They're either really bad sources in the case of Schmoop or SparkNotes, or alternatively they're sources that are considered to be general knowledge, so you wouldn't cite those anyway. As you choose one of these novels, it may behoove you to go on to JSTOR or EBSCO or Google Scholar and take a look and say, oh, there are a lot of material out here about what I'm looking to do, okay? And then take it from there, because again, we're not switching our book or our play once we choose it, okay? So you may say, oh yeah, I'll do McTeague, and then 5 weeks pass and you decide to look and find out and see that there's not a lot of sources out there, but pretending that there's not a lot of sources out there, you can't come back and say, gosh, I made my decision and now I can't stick to it, okay, because I didn't look first. So I think a week is enough time to take a look at the list and try to figure out what you need and then sign up for something. One thing I will bring up of those 5 sources, okay, remember these 5 academic sources here, of those additional academic sources, one of those has to be a news or magazine article from that era, okay? And so if you choose something from 1932, okay, then you need to have something from that era, okay, that will help support your argument about that particular work and how it fits in with everything else. It could be a review from that era, of which there are many, of that particular work. It could be an interview with the author from that era. It could be somebody just mentioning a social issue during that era. And so, for instance, one thing that we talk about for White Heron, right, and Sarah Orne Jewett during the semester is how standards of female beauty, right, and idealism shift over time in the United States. Well, maybe you'll find, as you do some research, some stuff from the 10s and 20s where people say, well, look at how women are changing over time in terms of people's conceptions of what it means to be a, quote, beautiful woman. Okay, so that's certainly going to be one thing I'm looking for when I take a look at your works cited page and your research. Is there something from around the same time period where you have chosen your novel? Okay, so these are the novels here. I'm not going to go through them just because that's going to be a huge amount of time, and then also because I don't want to spoil anything. But there are a few plays on here. So Blues for Mr. Charlie and both of our Eugene O'Neill works here are plays, or the other one. But for the most part, they're novels. Some of them are off the beaten path. Others are ones where there's going to be tons of stuff out there. And so there are different challenges. Ones that are a little bit more off the beaten path means that you have to be a little more creative in your research. Ones in which there's tons of stuff out there means that you have to be very discriminating in terms of the research that you do and say, okay, when I Google this or when I take a look at JSTOR, I'm not just going to pick the first 4 things. Okay, instead what I'm going to do is I am going to go through and take a look for the stuff that best matches what I need. That means I have to go on to the 5th or 6th page to find what I need. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. And let me bring up the rubric. So the rubric for this work will be posted on the discussion board. Let me see if I won't be able to get them both on the screen, but basically 6 different domains. Let me see if I can get a little zoomed in here. Okay, so this is the rubric you'll be submitting through Turnitin.com. This is the first part of the rubric, but you'll see the weights for the individual categories over here on the left-hand side, and then the overall, view of what's going on. What I do when I do Turnitin, of course, I mark up your paper in terms of leaving comments and stuff. But I just kind of click on the rubric and I say, got this, maybe some issues here. I just click and that tells me what your grade is. I find that to be a little bit easier for students to decipher than holistically, where I feel like you got an 80%, or I feel like maybe this is a 76. In this case, I'm just clicking boxes and I'm saying, yes, you did this, no, you didn't do this, and so on. So here we have our length, okay, and so you can see that's going to impact your grade a little bit, and so if you bleed over to here, but you do everything else okay, that's fine. The length does not include the material on your Works Cited page. So as far as the research goes, again, that's going to be one of the bigger components, and again, you'll have to have those sources as well as the primary supporting source. So in other words, in this case, the way this is worded is a little bit awkward, but again, your primary source is whatever it is you're writing about, and then you have that other primary source, so that's off that, and then 5 sources beyond that. So basically here, instead of 5 plus 2 is 6 plus 1. Okay, that's the only difference is there. And so then just kind of going across, you'll see as you sort of have issues or you don't cite all the sources correctly, you'll lose points. And over here, I want you to notice you can cite 6 sources, okay, but one of them may be something that isn't good, okay. You may cite shmoop.com for reasons I won't understand, but you may do that. But you still have 6 other sources. It doesn't matter. You're going to drop over here. Okay, this is the big leagues now. We're getting ready to go off to our 3rd and 4th years of university, and I've got tons of horror stories in which professors were less than pleasant to students who did things like cite shmoop.com and so on and so forth. So it's good to get out of the habit now rather than waiting for bad stuff to happen. Over here, by now, we should be familiar with MLA style. And so I will be very discriminating in that you have gone through at least 2 classes, hopefully by now, in which you learned MLA style, as well as any number of resources that are available to you online. So it's really not a lot of excuses. I've had students that, for 242, whatever reason, turned in a paper that was single-spaced Calibri 11 or something like that, and that's already dropping them to here, okay? And so keep that in mind. One other thing about research too that I wanted to bring up before I move it is if you don't have your parenthetical cites, then that will be dropped here, or if you have stuff on the Works Cited page that's not cited in the paper, or vice versa, you'll find yourself at the bottom of this. Research is the key for what you're doing. The thesis is fairly straightforward. It should be presenting an argument about that work by placing it back into the time period. So you could say something as simple as, just to use an example from the stuff that we'll read, you could say, in Henry James's Daisy Miller, the author examines the stereotypes of masculinity during the 18-whatevers, okay? And that would be an argument. In other words, somebody could come along and say, yeah, it's about that, but it's also about this. Or no, it's about this instead. So that's going to be a portion of your grade as well. So let me bring up the second half, which is a little bit smaller, and zoom in a little bit. Grammar, by this point in time, you don't really have too many issues with grammar. Just kind of run it through a couple of checks, have another pair of eyes on it before you turn it in. One thing that I will warn you, that's a pet peeve of mine, is if you misspell character or author names, or you misspell the title of the work. You're supposed to be an expert on what you're writing about, and if you're not doing that through your grammar, you'll find yourself dropping pretty significantly over here. And so every now and again I have a student that will spell Hemingway with 2 M's or something like that, and I'm like, really? That's not going to happen. So just kind of keep that in mind. If I have to stop during my reading of your paper at least twice because I'm like, what did they just write? Okay, then you're going to lose everything that's going on here. By now we shouldn't have any grammar issues at all. Then just basic comprehension, you'll see that's a big portion, again, that you're able to take this novel and tie it to the literature that we've read, or at least one piece, and then tie everything into history, criticism, social movements, however that you want to pursue it as well. And you'll see, you can read these and sort of piece together what happens as a result of that. But all of your data and evidence should show that you know what you're talking about. And that's basically how I view it. How well does a student know what they're talking about? Wow, they're doing a really good job. So I've got no idea what they're trying. And so that's basically the rubric for the paper. So again, you'll see here all the stuff. We'll sign up for these in the first week or so-ish of class. There'll be announcements and a link to Google Doc in which you can do that. I have had students in the past try to edit the Google document and remove somebody from a work that they wanted or move their name around after I've locked them in. And I would like you to remember that I can always find out the number of edits that have occurred in that particular Google document file. So if you do something like that, you're in danger of breaking the college's academic honesty policies.